Bueno, ahora ya nos vamos un poco serios. There has been a slight change in the program. I'm not going to be speaking, I'm just going to be the chair of this panel. Yes, a question of time, and I'm really sorry, but you will really appreciate it. I don't have to speak, so we will be just listening to these two colleagues. I'm going to introduce my colleagues and friends, to be honest. The first one to speak, who is going to speak because he has decided so, is Richard. I'm going to introduce him. Richard Jorge received his BA in English Studies at the University of the Basque Country, and later on proceeded to enhance his knowledge in the field of literature with an MA in Anglo-Irish Literature and Drama at University College Dublin, where his minor thesis on the relation of Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu and the Gothic tradition was supervised by Declan Kybert. He completed his PhD at the University of Santiago de Compostela, researching the relationship between the short story and the Irish Gothic tradition in the writings of James Clarence Mangan, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and Bram Stoker. He's currently teaching at the University of the Basque Country, UPV EHU. So, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you for being here on a Friday morning like this. So without further ado, I'll start. David Ponter has argued that even if spaces in the fantastic are imaginary within them, and I quote, historical and cultural conflicts are played out, albeit in forms that stretch our understanding of everyday location and our usual interpretations of cause and effect, end of quote. Postcolonial writers have employed physical spaces as decolonizing tools to counter imperial control, proving essential in rebuilding the thwarted relationships between colonized peoples and their native lands. Gonan has similarly highlighted the importance of rural portrayals in decolonizing narratives. Well, these perspectives render Stoker's depictions of Irish rural settings under new interpretative light. Stoker's conspicuous pastoral portrayals of the Irish countryside appear to counter the colonial tenet of the other as savage and uncivilized. His depictions unveil the centrality of animated spaces as decolonizing tools in resisting imperial violence, validating the roots of Irish folklore. Today, I'll be considering Bram Stoker's fiction The Gambeen Man, 1889, by examining his narrative portrayal of Irish rural spaces. Through a postcolonial approximation to setting deployment, I'll analyze Stoker's geographic depictions in the wider context of the Irish Gothic tradition. Read as liminal spaces, these settings reverse colonial images of the other, showing colonizers as a damaging force at odds with their alleged civilizing mission. An issue which had greatly disturbed Stoker's contemporaries in class, the land question, and I quote, perhaps the most pressing problem besetting post-Union Ireland, and I quote, and indubitably an inheritance of British colonial rule in Ireland, was also to feature strongly the Gambeen Man. The story is originally part of a longer fiction, The Snake's Pass, 1890, which was published by People and the Weekly Mail. After its appearance and publication as part of the book, however, it was further released in 1904 on its own as a short story by John D. Morris and Company in Irish Literature, Volume H, for the reprints of the story in Charles Osborne's The Bram Stoker Bedside Companion, 1973, and Peter Haynan's Midnight Tales, 1990, further attest to its consideration as a short story on its own. The larger background of The Snake's Pass is, of course, influential in determining that of the Gambeen Man. This larger work of fiction, Bram Stoker's first successful attempt at offering a novel, is also where Irish landscape features most prominently, and where Bram Stoker deals with, and I quote, the social conditions of 19th century Ireland, and I quote, most overtly. The landlord-tenant relationship, the big house, and the waning influence of the Anglo-Irish, the permanence of oral traditions, or the truncated social mobility of the Catholic population are all issues which conform the background of the narrative. Due to its fragmentary inception as a short story narrative, these social conditions are not explicitly mentioned in The Gambeen Man. Nonetheless, they conform the ultimate backdrop against which the story is delineated. Told from a deceptive third point of view, The Gambeen Man narrates an encounter and disagreement which takes place somewhere near Corra, County Galway. During a stormy night, Film Joyce, the protagonist of the story, arrived in the pub after his, and I quote, mare slipped coming down the Corra Hill and threw me over the bank of a lake, end of quote. Such an accident implies two consequences, the first of which is that, to save his life, he, and I quote, had to hold on with me one arm for I fear the other is broke, end of quote. Most importantly, his falling into the lake means a great loss of time, hindering him from repaying his debt to Martha Murdoch. Consequently, the sheriff, and I quote, sold the lease of a farm known as the Sheena Nahar an open sale in accordance with the terms of a notice duly posted and with warning given to the holder of a lease, in a quote. Having lost almost all his property, Phelim is enraged and, I quote, clutching the ash sapling he had used as a riding whip, he struck the eel face, that is Murdoch's, before him, in a quote. A short scuffle ensues, which is stopped by the men present and the intervention of a priest, who remonstrates both men. Phelim for, and I quote, your angry passion, and I quote, and Murdoch for his greediness. And I quote, you're worse than the land grabber, worse than the man who only covets, end of quote. After the scuffle is over, Murdoch has abandoned the scene. The narrator offers to accompany the protagonist home. Thus, the whole company, and I quote, ventured into the inky darkness of a night, end of quote. After a short detour at the doctor's house to get Phelim's arm fixed, they proceed to drive him home, where the narrator meets the protagonist's daughter, Nora. She, and I quote, in a sweet voice said shyly, "Good night, sir, and thank you for your kindness to your father," end of quote. After this short exchange of words, the story finishes with the narrator and his driver setting off again, with the former musing about his last unexpected encounter. This brief summary suffices to show that there is something amiss in this story. If one applies O'Phelan's theory on the structure of short narratives that, and I quote, the story follows step by step the main idea, and I quote, one quickly realizes that there seems to be no apparent connection between the issues narrated, as the stories do not seem to foreshadow a final story. The scuffle is not taken any further, and Murdoch's threat that, and I quote, there's them here what'll rue this day yet, and I quote, is not fulfilled. Nor is there any resolution to Phelim's land problems. Not to mention that the narrator's brief encounter with Nora, despite his assertion that, and I quote, seemed to have become part of my life, end of quote, is left unfinished, and it brings the story to an end, and it seems not to relate to the rest of the narrative. There is one element, however, which connects and explains all these different narrative aspects, and that is setting. Paralleling the stories of other Irish writers of the period, notably Chase Mangan and J. Slefanus, the Gombe Man levels the importance of setting depiction to that of characterization. At the heart of Stoker's narrative lies a portrayal of rural Ireland. The story opens with Phelim arriving in the pub, and I quote, Rome was made for him at the fire. He no sooner came near it and tasted the heat than a cloud of steam arose from him, end of quote. Although the hyperbolic steam aroused from him is intended to reinforce the fact that he had nearly drowned, the coziness of the scene created by the word choice should also be noted. Room, fire, heat are all evocative of comfort, while using the verb taste to refer to the perception of the heat coming from the fire gives it a more visceral meaning, emphasizing the comforting sensation. Similar scenes are recurrent in the story, all reinforcing this idea of a comforting peasant home, constituting the retrieval of pseudo-Edenic homes of an, and I quote, unspoiled pastoral past, end of quote. Thus, once the scuffle between Phelim and Murdoch is over and the latter has left the place, they, and I quote, sat around the fire again, whilst without the storm howled and the fierce gusts which swept the valley seemed at times as if they would break in the door, lift off the roof, or in some way annihilate the time-worn cabin which gave us shelter, end of quote. In the scene, Bram Stoker manages to emphasize the idea of a comforting home by opposing it to the fierceness and ferocity of nature. Thus, nature is personified. It howls and is characterized as fierce, while simultaneously being capable of exerting such animate, albeit brutal, actions as breaking doors or lifting roofs. Such ferocity is set in direct opposition to the house, which is described as a time-worn cabin. Bram Stoker's diction is not random here. Despite nature's fierceness, the house can withstand the storm, as it has done many times before. Hence the usage of the adjective time-worn. Most remarkably, the house affords shelter, with all the positive connotations that the concept can conjure up in the reader's mind. The house the offers depict and gathers all the essential characteristics of a home. It offers comfort, represented in the fire, while simultaneously protecting individuals from extraneous elements, moving beyond the idealistic simplification of, and I quote, a pastoral retreat, a natural world to be conserved, end quote, often portrayed by colonial literature. All these associations are linked to the concept of a cabin, a typical peasant home in Ireland, and intimately associated to lower-class Catholics. While the treatment of this dwelling is certainly positive, it also acts as a reminder of social division, with the big house strongly connected to England, while the rural peasant home is reminiscent of Irish ancient times. Further, it offers a stark contrast with the idea of a no-home expressed by other Irish Gothic writers like Lefanu, thus broadening Moran and Shanahan's conceptualization of Irish Gothic as entrenched notions of the home. While differently expressed and caused by divergent agents, Stoker's portrayals of Catholic characters are also explore the characters, and I quote, ongoing uncertainty about the safety and security of their Irish homes, end of quote. The personification of setting acquires greater relevance as the story progresses. However, once Murdoch has left and being trapped in the cabin, waiting for the storm to abate, Film narrates, and I quote, how it was that Murdoch got me into his power, end of quote. It is thus that the protagonist explains how he borrowed money from Murdoch on the lease of the house so that he could get his son educated. However, having missed the appointment to pay Murdoch back gives the latter legal possession of his land. It is then that one of the men assembled asks Phelim if, and I quote, ye signed to will of the land, or only the lower farm, end of quote. To this Phelim replies that, and I quote, only the lower farm, indeed I couldn't part with the cliff fields, for they don't belong to me, they are Norris, end of quote. This conversation leads to comparison of Phelim and Murdoch's land, which, and I quote, is poor soil, only with a few good patches here and there. Moreover, there's a bog which is high up in the hill, mostly on his holding, end of quote. Although there is nothing exceptional about a bog in Ireland, what is remarkable is Old Dan's comment to Phelim's narration, and I quote, true enough, that bog of the Gumbeans is a much use anyhow. It's rank and rotten with water. When it made up its mind to stay, it might have done better. The bog made up its mind to stay. What on earth do you mean? I asked. I was fairly puzzled. Didn't you hear talk already, said Dan, of the shifting bog on the mountain, end of quote. This scene is a key element in the story as it brings the very many different elements in it together. The shifting bog, that is, a bog that of its own volition decides to change places, is nature embodied and personified. Most importantly, however, the bog is depicted as a superior element capable of deciding who belongs and who doesn't, and of redressing man's misdoings if appropriate. The bog therefore becomes, and I quote, a protean place of ambivalence where borders are blurred, end of quote. Impacts anxieties derived from colonialism are explored. This undoes colonial perceptions that the colonies were places of, and I quote, banishment, unlawful practice, oppression, and social disgrace. Dark lands where worthy citizens might not wish to stray, end of quote. The bog embodies an element prior to human agency, but intrinsically linked to the community. And I quote, it moved and moved longer than anyone can remember. My grandfather once told me that when he was a gossoon, it wasn't nigh so big as it was when he told me. I make bold to say that it has made up its mind to stay, end of quote. The community perceives the bog as having punished Murdoch by watering his land, while it can help Phelim out. And I quote, you only have to make the best of it, Phelim. I dare say you will turn it to some account, end of quote. In fact, Phelim's not suffering a total dispossession is not attributed to inheritance nor even to destiny, but to the interference of nature in his favour. And I quote, the words of the storyteller came back to me again and again. The hill can hold tight enough. A man has raisins, sometimes one thing, sometimes another, but the hill holds him all the same, end of quote. Stoker introduces here a loophole, the possibility encouraged by the narration of existence of an animated bog, which he based on well-documented real occurrences. Maury mentions how these rare happenings were, and I quote, mischievous and terrifying to the local people, end of quote. Such supernatural agency would be responsible for Phelim's salvation. Stoker achieves this by presenting all lore in the words of a storyteller, who is validated by an impartial narrator. A mere observer and a voice alien to the community, the narrator nonetheless acknowledges his belief in the story and in the agency of the bog. And I quote, a vague wonder grew upon me as to whether it could ever hold me and how, end of quote. This credence dismantles the concept of progress used to legitimize the, and I quote, imperial conquest under the guise of its civilizing mission, while the celebration of reason disqualifies other belief systems as irrational or superstitious, end of quote. The narrator's acceptance of the storyteller's words implies a tacit belief in and acceptance of what he is saying, thus disqualifying the supposed narrative of progression which, and I quote, authorized the destruction of primitive cultures in favour of assimilation to European standard of civility, end of quote. The bog is Bram Stoker's ultimate decolonizing element in the story, becoming an element of, and I quote, resistance to transformation of colonial societies, end of quote. as mentioned before, is a felon from destitution while punishing Murdoch for his greed, evocative of, and I quote, the uncanny haunting nature of a past and its ability to turn the familiar suddenly strange, end of quote. Such a portrayal could suffice as a not-so-veiled reference to the almost daily evictions which had plagued Irish Catholics for centuries. These had left a post-famine social structure heavily dependent on inherited land, and I quote, with one child, typically the eldest son, inheriting the land and delaying marrying until he received his inheritance, making prospects for non-inheriting siblings bleak, end of quote. The story is, however, more explicit in its denunciation of landlord-tenant relationship and the injustices created and fostered by the British colonial system in Ireland, with local magistrates and the police, and I quote, seen as a partisan force loyal to the Protestant ascendancy and hostile to the Catholic tenantry, end quote. Murdoch's getting hold of Film's land, although performed by the latter's free will, is assisted by the British colonial justice system grounded in Ireland. Film's main reason to liaise his land is to give his son, and I quote, the right start in life, end of quote, and become an engineer. With an educational system which had been biased against Catholics and in favour of Protestant classes for centuries, this basically meant that he had to resort to private funding or the generosity of the well-to-do. As Film himself explains, and I quote, I went to see Sir George Henshaw. Now he said he would take the boy. He told me that there was a big fee to be paid, but I was not troubled about that, end quote. Although Sir George does grant Film's son's education, he does so only partially, for Sir George's partner, and I quote, said he couldn't give up all the fee, but that he would take half the fee, provided it was paid down in dry money, end quote. Such generosity only highlights the differences between the accommodated Protestant and the lower Catholic classes. Division Film makes even more explicit, and I quote, the regular fee for the firm was £500. I hadn't got more than a few pounds by me for what with training and panting and fencing and the paying the boys schooling and the girls at the nuns in Galway. It had to put me to the pen of me collar to find the money up to now, end quote. The massive imbalance between the fee paid for such studies, £500, and Film's usage of a vague expression, a few pounds, further highlights the class distance between lower-class Catholic peasants and the educated Protestant elite. Such distance is not only underscored by the hyperbolic asymmetry in social class Bram Stoker confronts his readership with, a sir with a clear English name versus a peasant of Irish origin, but also by the Sorsvenken. While Sir George Henshaw deals with more intellectual matters, holding what can be termed as a white-collar profession, and Owen shares in a company, Film is near destitute, getting his sustenance from toiling hard in the soil, as made explicit by the polysyndeton concatenating farm activities. It is also noticeable that, in this context, paying for education is the last element to be mentioned. The hypothesis that this could be due to his not attaching sufficient importance to education is ruled out by the fact that he's ready to, and I quote, put me pride in my pocket and came and ask Murdoch for the money, end quote. It is his need to cater for sustenance first, which relegates education to the last element on his mind, despite his knowing that this is the only factor which might finalise his family's rootedness in poverty. This way, Stoker's narrative offers a very different vision from the pastoral images which had been used to depict the Irish landscape as, and I quote, lush vegetation, pastoral plenitude filled with birds and beasts, end quote. This last fact is further strengthened by Sir George's capacity not to charge Film, for, and I quote, he himself didn't want any fee, end quote. As the scene makes clear, social mobility is hindered by a well-rooted colonial system which prevents lower Irish Catholics from climbing up the social ladder. Paradoxically, those further from the land are the ones to profit from it, while those closest to it, daily work and in close contact with nature, are forced to live in cabins barely resisting the passage of time and cut off from any possibilities of social and economic improvement. The story marks a divide between the dispossessed colonial subjects who are shown, and I quote, closer to a state of nature and thus an authentic sense of essential humanity, end quote, and colonizers who, and I quote, collaborated in dispossessing local communities whose lands were appropriated by the administration for individual and corporate gain, end quote. It thus unveils, and I quote, extreme disruptive natures of colonial restructuring and extraction of land-based resources, end quote. In brief, the contrast between Film and Sir George then dispels one of the myths of colonialism, the idea that, and I quote, perfectibility of man was to take place in this world as well as the next through the forced march of reason and Western civilization. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard.
So please.
Okay, let me introduce now to the other member of this panel, Dr. Charlie Jorge. Dr. Charlie Jorge is an assistant professor at the University of the Balearic Islands, Spain, where he lectures on 18th century English literature. He specializes in Gothic literature, archetypal and Irish studies, and has been working for some years on the novels of Gothic authors such as Charles Robert Maturin or Anne Radcliffe. He has recently published some articles on the archetypes of the terrible mother and the scapegoat in Irish and Gothic literature, and on the image of the Catholic Church in Melmoth the Wanderer. He has also been working with the London Centre for Interdisciplinary Research for several years, where he is in charge of the project, The Uncanny in Literature, Language and Culture, leading to the publication of 2 edited volumes. So, Charlie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for being here this morning, Friday. I know it's cold, gosh, so hope you had coffees. So we're going to start now. So, to start off, scholars like David Lehman, Northrop Frye, and Eric Neumann started outlining a pattern for both aspects of the major Great Mother, also known as Great Goddess archetype, the Good Mother archetype, and a more creative feminized aspect of the goddess on the one hand, and the other hand, the Terrible Mother archetype, a more violent, death-related, and masculinized aspect. Both archetypes would come to represent respectively the positive and negative elementary characters of the primordial goddess, a Euroboric primeval goddess that would contain both the aforementioned aspects. To draw the pattern for both archetypes, Neumann and other scholars examined figures from different myths around the globe that have the same recurrent predications in common and applied them to art, literature, and psychology. So in the following minutes, I'm going to analyze the embodiment of these evil mothers in the figure of the widow Sandal in The Lover's Tale, one of the Matryoshka-like stories embedded in Charles Maturin's novel Melmoth the Wanderer, published in 1820, which is written pretty much in the aftermath of the Act of Union. A date that will bring both a feeling of desolation through mother figures are so akin to, and we will see how these figures emerge, as we see how these figures emerge, and quote, among those people who felt themselves utterly powerless before the voracious maw of a Napoleon war machine, end of quote. A time of rebellions and an Act of Union. So, economic, political and social tensions at the end of the 18th century in Ireland, alongside the 1798 United Irishmen Rebellion, made Irish Prime Minister William Pitt realised the present necessity of a union between Ireland and Great Britain. The Act of Union was managed through the Irish House of Commons in the accepted manner, with blatant patronage and bribery, most of which was crafted by Admiral Thomas Pakenham, the uncle of Lord Longford. The most recognizable aspect of this character precisely is related to the Union, and concretely to, and quote, Pakenham's bullying and press ganging of voters in the Irish House of Commons, end of quote. So the stolen Irish Parliament was linked to the broken Treaty of Limerick in the long tradition of Albion's perfidy, which was linked as well with a feeling of self-betrayal, as it was the Irish Parliament who voted itself out of existence, as Ireland's, and quote, maternal ambition for her son, end of quote, like her people, actually, the Irish nation, brought ruin and destruction. So, well, to let you know about The Lover's Tale. I don't know if you're familiar with Melmoth the Wanderer. Some people might, okay? Pretty much The Lover's Tale is a story that is told. It's one of these embedded stories in the novel's labyrinthine structure, foregrounding themes of love, suffering, temptation, and endurance, okay? Pretty much is told by Melmoth himself, okay, the Wanderer, to Fernando de Aliaga. Okay, it's like as a kind of parable. It's like pretty much like, to put into context, like the story into context, he wants Fernando to go back home to save his daughter from marrying Melmoth, pretty much the tempter, shall we say, the devil, the agent of the devil. Okay, he fails at doing this, by the way. So the story itself focuses on, Margaret Mortimer, the heiress of the Mortimer fortune, Eleanor Mortimer, and John Sandal, three cousins who grew up together in Mortimer Castle under the instructions of their late uncle, Sir Roger Mortimer. So eventually, Eleanor and John fall in love with each other and head to their wedding ceremony when John abandons Eleanor after his recently recovered mother, it's like she just appears out of nowhere, okay, tells him that in reality he is Eleanor's mother's son and therefore Eleanor's brother. Overcome by anguish and social disgrace, Eleanor is left to confront the prospect of a life marked by sorrow and isolation as she exiles herself to her Puritan aunt's house in the countryside until she learned that Margaret and John have got married, and Margaret is about to die in childbirth. Eleanor returns to Mortimer Castle to discover, along the rest of the family, okay, that, at Margaret's dying moments, that her brother-sister relationship with John Sandal had been a forgery carried out by the widow Sandal, John's mother. To gain the Mortimer fortune through marriage, cousin John sink into madness. So then, after we have this little, introduction to the story, a bit mad. So, what's the terrible mother? So, as Eric Neumann points out, the Ouroboros, the snake biting its tail, is a symbol of the United Primordial parents from whom the figures of the Great Father and the Great Mother later crystallized out. From this undifferentiated primordial archetype, the archetypal feminine and the archetypal masculine have been differentiated, both still containing elements of the other. And, quote, this primordial archetype of the feminine contains positive and negative male determinants aside from the predominant male elements, end of quote. Of which the terrible mother contains the negative ones of death and destruction, danger and distress. So, of all the features, the links that these embodiments of the terrible mother present, we'll focus on that which Justina Zempruk defines as the paradigmatic representation of evil mothers, stepmothers, and witches, all quintessential embodiments of the terrible mother. This archetypal, shall we call, witch is constituted as, and quote, hysterical and disordered in relation to logocentric structures, end of quote, pointing out that, and quote, her speech perverts the language of philosophers. Laughter, spells, and evil incantations flow from her grotesque and filthy mouth, end of quote. Positioned in an asymmetrical position to logocentric reasoning, these evil mothers articulate, and quote, a force of subversion that exceeds her own representation within the philosophical logos, end of quote. It is this logos, or rather, as Freud would put it, the demonic aspect, the dark side, okay, that Neumann refers to when he reminds us of the terrible mother's connection with the realm of the dead, the negative aspect of what some scholars call the upper womb. That is the lips, the birthplace of breath, and the word, the logos itself. Okay, but the destructive side of the feminine in this case, its demonic aspect, as Neumann mentions, and quote, the destructive and deadly womb appears most frequently in the archetypal form of a mouth bristling with teeth, end of quote. What some call the motif of the vagina dentata. David Lemming reminds us of some of these figures who are furnished with a variety of knives and sharp teeth and demand blood child sacrifices. These uncanny figures, okay, destroy and annihilate life, like for example as Philip Pullman brings back to mind the tales collected by enthusiasts and authors such as the Grimm brothers, where stepmothers like Cinderella's ask their own daughters to chop parts of their body off, the feet in this case, to make them fit into the golden shoe to get the prince's hand. Okay, so the demonic aspect of the logos, the word itself, would be its perversion that, as Zempruk reminds us, is the quintessential feature of these evil female embodiments. So therefore it's not surprising that this corruption of the word comes from that upper womb. As we've mentioned, the lips that should be the source of life and love become a grotesque and filthy mouth full of teeth, the vagina dentata, and cast spells and even incantations. In the case of the widow Sandal, okay, we cannot not see them through her crafted maneuvers to gain the riches and fortune of the Mortimer family. Kind of a pagan guy there in the Act of Union. As the daughter of Sir Roger Mortimer, until she was, as the daughter, she was the daughter of Sir Roger Mortimer, obviously, until she was expelled from the family due to her relationship with the heretic Sandal. She was accustomed to riches and a high position in society. a position she's more than willing to recover as, and I quote, she hovered round the walls of the castle like a departed spirit, groaning for its readmission to the place from which it had been driven, and feeling and given no peace till its restoration was accomplished, end of quote. Therefore, through all the artifice given to her by false religion, which, unquote, taught her every shade and penumbra of hypocrisy, even meanness of artifice, every obliquity of insinuation, end of quote. She extracted from the servants the assumed secret information of Sir Roger's will, like the chaperone, shall we say, of both sisters, and, well, cousins, sorry, like Margaret and Eleanor was supposed, like Miss Anne. She was the only one, supposedly, who knew about the secret. And that is, if John Sandal married Margaret and not Eleanor, he would inherit through her all the Mortimer estates and fortune. Otherwise, it would go to a distant cousin. Okay? Thus, the mother who, unquote, had known the good and chosen the evil, end of quote, prepared to concoct a plan as a witch in her cauldron to destroy John and Eleanor's plan to get married. On the day of their wedding, she summons John, and as Eleanor learns at a later point, tells him that he's not her son, but in reality, Eleanor's mother's son, as she had an affair with Preacher Sandal. Therefore, by destroying her son's hopes of marriage to the woman he loved, the widow Sandal turns herself willingly into his stepmother. She is, unquote, too ambitious of the remembered distinctions of her early life not to risk anything that might enable her to recover them, end of quote. Her ambition to recover her former fortune and status bring her to destroy the last motherly link to her son, being his mother, both biological and natural. She's not his mother any longer, supposedly. And being alien to motherly love as she brings ruin to her own son. As an embodiment of these goddesses that demand child sacrifices, as David Lehman reminded us, the widow Sandal's maneuvers and concocted stories and lies, her defiance to these philosophical logos, as Sempruk tells us, bring destruction to her son as the narrative unfolds, as I told you. As we saw before, after Eleanor exiles herself to her Puritan aunt's house, described as the realm of the dead, she learns about Margaret and John's wedding. However, she decides to return to Mortimer Castle as Margaret asks her to come back for her dying hours at childbirth, as she gives birth to dead twins. Curiously enough, again, the union between Margaret and John, the future of the Mortimer house and castle, is destroyed at childbirth. So, corroded by guilt because she created all this, okay, or rather, the curse she brought upon the family through her actions, the widow Sandal, and, quote, tore her hair out by the roots and imprecated the most fearful curses on her head, kind of quote. Finally, after bursting in the room where all mourned the dead Margaret, the widow Sandal, unquote, confessed the secret of her guilt and developed to its full foul base the foundation of that pile of iniquity and sorrow which had now reached its summit, end of quote. Her foul mouth still curses and seems to cast evil spells that will bring fatal destruction to all present, above all her son. At learning his mother's confession, John is driven into madness, sinking with the corpse of a dead wife, both sinking into fatal darkness as mourners and, quote, hardly knew which to deplore, her who was deprived of the light of life, or him in whom the light of reason was extinguished forever, end of quote. The child sacrifices these dark goddesses claim for ambition is complete. Both are dead. In conclusion, the widow Sandal's evil and witch-like crafts, her terrible motherness, brings forth traumatic memories of this terrible destiny Ireland faced for, as Julia Kristeva reminds us, by, unquote, incorporation of the devouring mother, and of course, abjection and trauma are reenacted and brought back to life like a revenant. Such a role is accomplished by the widow Sandal in Maturin's The Lover's Tale, as her evil mouth, her upper womb, pour out death and ruin instead of life and future joy. Her filthy mouth is ready to engulf anybody who interferes in her way, as Melmoth tells Zaliaga in his narration. As the widow Sandal, unquote, had known the good and chosen the evil, end of quote, so did Ireland choose the evil of a foul contract when opting for the Act of Union in a pretense of, like getting better, okay? Maturin's motherland had become a sort of witch, a cailleach, bringing destruction and ruin to the country and leaving Dublin as a dead corpse of empty carcasses, as Maturin also describes in his novel Women Are Poor Country. As Harold Schechter points out, when a culture faces the worst of humankind, a figure, unquote, ferocious and terrifying surfaced in the national psyche and began to supplant the good mother in our dreams. She is Callie, the black one, the dark, all-devouring, bone-wreathed lady of the skulls, end of quote. She is the banshee of legend and tale, giving shape to the fears arising in the Irish nation, who sees its gloomy future in post-Act of Union Ireland like the banshee prophesying death at the end of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Now, if there are any questions? No questions at all? Well, I may have some. You have a question? Okay, he has got a question. Richard.
I have a question. I do have a question. Charlie, it's very interesting. Well, first of all, compliments on the pictures, because they just fit the purpose, right? No, but I do have a question. It's a common question, let's see. Commenting question. Should we talk about the evil mother, this force of subversion, this evil dark force of destruction? And of course, those figures are not uncommon in 19th century literature. I'm thinking of Carmilla or the female figures, any of the female figures in Dracula. But I was just wondering if we had thought about how it opposes this idea of the female as an image for the nation. So common in the 19th century, this thing of Britannia or Mother Ireland especially, right? And have you given any thought to this idea of the evil mother as opposed to, or as a result of, or a corruption of, perhaps, this concept of Mother Ireland, especially there in the context of the Act of Union and etc.? That would be my question.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. Okay, this is not prepared. Okay, we didn't concoct this in the car. Okay, so the evil mother and Mother Ireland, Ireland, on the Mother Ireland, it kind of has, like these two sides, this duality of the mother. It's like in the end you have like the positive one is nurturing and it's giving birth, etc. It's like the mother nation, but even more with this Act of Union around, and that actually Ireland chose the Act of Union. It's like fair enough. Again, by bribery, by lies and selling properties and estates and all that, etc. Seats in the Parliament in London. It's kind of. She's all of a sudden turned into this evil mother. It's she chose actually she chose evil pretty much. It's she chose this disgrace for the Irish nation in the future. Fair enough, with lies and all that, but somehow it's the country itself chose this dark future for the Irish people. So in a way, as you mentioned, it's this Mother Ireland, even more through the 19th century, because the 19th century, pretty much we could say that is and even into the 20th and even the 21st century, it's the result of the Act of Union is this long process of trauma and all that, even more with the land, etc. Later on, we'll see it in the 20th century and 21st century with the Catholic Church as well. It's the Mother Church and all that.
I'm thinking as well, now that you mentioned it, of Sean O'Casey's Begin. I think it's Sean O'Casey, right? Shadow of the Glen. Begin is a very different maternal figure. To
Yeah.
this question of Mother Ireland, perhaps it's not quite so dark.
Yeah, well, maybe not so dark and all that, but yeah, you have like different like evil Mother Irelands like across like this shall we say this long 19th century and all that, and 20th century. I'm thinking as well of James Joyce and all that. It's like with these dark mothers, like what was that the Burton House as well. Okay, so you have all these like evil mothers, okay, kind of using their children or kind of almost eating them up, I would say.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to ask Richard a question, but actually I have a question for you. I know that you are an expert in Melmoth, and that you specialize in archetypal studies. And I was wondering, and you always tell us about this terrible mother in Melmoth, and I was wondering whether you find that same archetype in more recent and contemporary literature, since I believe that those archetypes are always repeating themselves. I mean, and we can find them in every field. I mean, we find them in films, in novels, in every aspect of life. So could you just give us some kind of other examples apart from those that you find in the work of Maturin?
Right, thank you very much. Okay, and just two examples, like very, very like shall we say like very recent, kind of. Okay, for example, like you have, I'm thinking now of Patrick McCabe. Okay, like the Stray Sod Country, and you have like Golly Murray, kind of very kind of evilish mother and all that. Okay, beats her child because she has this, shall we say, this unconscious trauma, shall we say, that the the fetch, okay, gets into her brain and tries to extract, okay, like this supernatural force. And then recently I've watched actually like a short film, like very short, it's like 20 minutes as well. This is in Irish, okay, it's called Roguery. Okay, like in English would be translated as the Rogues, okay? And you have as well, like, it's kind of set in the 18th century, the 18th century, like pre-Act of Union. And you have like a woman who is killed and she returns as a kind of evil mother with the same features, kind of, because, I mean, she's killed in the womb, okay? So she doesn't even give birth because, like, her husband kills her because he wants the inheritance, okay? So that was directed, McCabe's novel is from 2010, Post-Celtic Tiger Failure. And the short film, I'm not quite sure now, but I think this is from the 2020s at some stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. And now I have a question for Richard. Richard, you talk about using the Irish landscape as a decolonizing tool. Is that a pattern you've seen in other Irish Gothic writers?
Okay, thank you for the question. Definitely, I think so. You can see the importance of landscape. Landscape is very important. Well, no writing, but especially in Gothic writing, not just Irish Gothic writing. But you can see this similar pattern in other Irish Gothic writers like Lefanu or Mangan or even Melmoth as well. There's a story by Lefanu where landscape encompasses this idea of seclusion, and he represents it via landscape, and not just the manor house or the castle or a modern building. This is actually the description of landscape that surrounds the old house. Reminded somehow of the past, the Gaelic past of Ireland. And more recently, we can talk about, for example, Claire Keegan. And she's got a short story, The Night of the Quickened Trees, where actually this idea of the liminal, the otherworld, this idea of authenticity as well, the pure Irish authenticity is represented by the West, and she actually ends up going west. So definitely I would say it's a pattern that is recurrent in Irish literature, not just Gothic, actually in Irish literature. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Yes, Asier.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
I don't think Asier needs it, but
Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm sorry I was a bit late, but this is
I
just
turn it on.
It is on. It is on. All right. Okay. So anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah. Well, thank you for your presentations. And more than a question, is just a comment or maybe food for thought. And it could be for both of you. I mean, Charlie, you were in a way contending, I wouldn't say ferociously, all right, but contending that actually the representation that Charles Maturin has in Man with the Wanderer is that of an Ireland that has failed the Irish people in a way, all right? And because of the and that Ireland becomes this evil mother, even a witch, and you were contending that this is because of the Irish active union with Great Britain. But I mean, if we bear in mind that Charles Maturin, of course, belongs to the Anglo-Irish ascendancy, and many of the writers at that time, and even the politicians, in a way, were not the representation of the majority of the people of Ireland. Wouldn't you say that actually they are not blaming an Ireland that is failing their sons in this case, but actually they're blaming Great Britain, that is England, that is failing those Anglo-Irish who voted, because the Catholics and the majority of the Irish people couldn't vote for the Union, all right? But actually were failing that Anglo-Irish ascendancy, a minor part of that Ireland. And in a way, it's a representation of a fierce colonial imposition that is failing one part of what is now not a colony, but actually part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So to what extent that son that you were referring to is not that Anglo-Irish ascendancy compared to the more female Catholic and Gaelic and more Irish Ireland, let's say, of that time. And it is not actually Great Britain, that Hibernia, that Albion in this case, that is eating this Hibernia, this England that is Great Britain that is eating, because of ambition, of colonial ambition, eating the Anglo-Irish ascendancy and say, like, get out of the way, you're not working for me now, I don't need you anymore, you're part of Westminster, you're part of a parliament, I don't have a parliament over there, I'm just Great Britain, I'm just here. And knowing what happened after that with Queen Victoria and all that in the long 19th century, I don't know, wouldn't you say that I don't know, Charles Maturin was also playing with this idea of it's not Ireland that is failing us, it's not Ireland the witch, but it is actually Great Britain which has failed in this case and forgotten about us. Because now, what are we doing here in Ireland? Nothing. And of course, the idea of the absentees and all that, and the political replacement of all the, let's say, establishment over there in the 19th century. So, I don't know. I think that, I mean, your point is correct, and Richard's as well. Good, this idea that the hybridity of the Anglo-Irish ascendancy is pervasive in all these novels and all these works, and the colonial discourse is the right approximation for that. But I always see this Great Britain sometimes hidden or cloaked, or I don't know how to say it, trying to say, okay, it is your problem, but at the end of the day, it is me and my ambition against you. Right. Just food for thought.
Well, thank you very much for the comment and the question, as here. And actually, it's okay. And actually, it's interesting because, well, I mean, this story actually, like, well, as you know, is like, I mean, this story is like very short. It's kind of anecdotal and all that, but it's very, very complex and deep. Because, I mean, if we get into the religious thing, it's like Sandal could actually be like a perfect Anglo-Irish, because he is the son of, well, of the widow and a preacher who actually has the false religion. It's like Preacher Sandal doesn't even know what religion to follow. He just is a new preacher and he goes with him. Okay, so yeah. He's very good at preaching. That's true. Okay, so it's very deep, because like even the union, for example, like as I mentioned, between John and Margaret, like gives birth to like, you know, dead twins. It's like, I mean, so there's no union, like the whole castle family is destroyed. Eventually, therefore, the fortune goes to another member of the family. Okay, so It is, as you mentioned, is deeper and it's worth looking into it, even more from the religious perspective point of view, because 3 cousins, 3 different religions as well. Okay, so.
I mean, that even is a metaphor of the uselessness of the union.
Exactly.
Right? It's like we got married, and the output of this, if you can say it like that, is dead.
It's dead, yeah, exactly.
Failed marriage.
The failed marriage.
Absolutely.
Well, they married, but like, there's nothing. It's like there's no offspring, pretty much. Okay, so something to bear in mind. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that we should call it a day now because we have a plenary coming. And okay, so thank you very much for joining us, and I would just ask for a round of applause.